south landscape of Mississippi holds one of the strongest visual expressions of true American Gothic. Behind its quiet pine forests and slow-moving rivers, this region is filled with shadows of a dark past, the wreckage left by the Civil War, and the curse of epidemics that once swept through entire populations. Rows of rotting old plantation homes draped in Spanish moss, ruins of massive stone columns rising from wild forests, and ghost churches whose walls still hold cannon fire stand as real visual monuments on the ground. Exploring these 15 creepiest small towns in Mississippi takes us through the thick fog of the swamps to witness how silence, witch legends, and mass death turned human settlements into chilling districts. Buried deep in the swampy isolation of Jefferson County, Rodney stands as the ultimate image of a Gothic ghost town in Mississippi. Founded in the 19th century, this riverport town once grew into a prosperous cotton trading hub. The devastating blow of the Civil War and the yellow fever epidemic sealed its fate, leaving it completely abandoned with no residents remaining. Today, Rodney's visual atmosphere feels deeply haunting and oppressive. Amid dense wild forest growth stands Rodney Presbyterian Church, a red brick federal-style church built in 1832. Above the entrance of this old church, an original cannonball from a Union warship can still be clearly seen lodged in the brick wall, a silent witness to the bloody battles of the past. From the ghost church holding a cannonball in Rodney, the journey follows the old Natchez Trace route toward the silent ruins of Rocky Springs. This town began in the late 18th century as an important stop for travelers and grew into a self-sufficient farming community. Rocky Springs died tragically in the late 19th century when a deadly mix of yellow fever, boll weevil attacks, and severe soil erosion struck the town. Today, it has been fully swallowed by the inland wilderness of Mississippi. The only major structure still standing on the hill is Rocky Springs Methodist Church, built in 1837 and surrounded by an isolated old cemetery. Walking around this site creates a chilling sensation. Rows of old gravestones from the 1800s rise between large trees with branches covered in Spanish moss, forming an atmosphere of extreme loneliness and dark mysticism. The forest silence of Rocky Springs brings us to a story of ashes and total destruction from the Civil War in rural Choctaw County, where the ghost town of Bankston once stood. Today, no intact buildings remain, only archaeological traces buried beneath the dark forest floor. Explorers are met by mounds of earth from old machine foundations, overgrown with thorny brush, broken brick chimney remains, and an abandoned pioneer cemetery. The atmosphere feels heavy and frightening. In the mid-19th century, Bankston was a vital manufacturing town in Mississippi, operating large textile and shoe factories that supplied clothing for Confederate soldiers. Because of that strategic value, Bankston met a terrifying end on the night of December 30th, 1864, when Union cavalry under Colonel Benjamin Grierson surrounded the town and burned its factories, church, and homes to the ground. From the ashes of Bankston, we move to Hinds County to explore the thick Gothic atmosphere of historic Raymond. This small town carries deep historical trauma as the site of the Battle of Raymond in 1863, a bloody close-range battle during the Vicksburg campaign. The town's silence feels heavy and cold, especially as the camera enters Raymond's cemetery. In this old cemetery, rows of matching iron markers for hundreds of unknown Confederate soldiers stand stiffly, packed closely beneath giant trees draped in Spanish moss hanging down toward the swampy ground. The deep pain of the past, combined with the old antebellum courthouse facade and several neglected wooden buildings on the edge of town, creates a deeply chilling visual landscape on screen. Yes, Raymond offers a real portrait of how the shadow of death from an old battlefield remains frozen, locking this small town in eternal gloom. In contrast to Gainesville's military isolation, Electric Mills is a remnant of the timber industry's former glory. Founded in 1913 by the Sumter Lumber Company, Electric Mills was once a revolutionary model industrial town and the first inland town in Mississippi with fully electrified infrastructure. When the surrounding pine forests were completely exhausted in 1941, the mill closed, the machines were dismantled, and the entire town was simply abandoned to decay. Today, Electric Mills presents a powerful and eerie post-apocalyptic scene. Behind chest-high wild brush rise the ruins of massive concrete foundations from the old sawmill, the remains of rotting, leaning wooden power poles, and rusted work vehicles slowly merging with the forest floor. From the timber ruins of Electric Mills, the journey pulls back to the early 19th century frontier era in Lowndes County, where the old ghost town of Plymouth once stood. Yes, Plymouth has completely vanished from modern maps, and its area is now a very quiet, protected forest site. Broken old gravestones create a raw, deep South Gothic atmosphere, giving the impression that this is forbidden ground guarded by shadows of the past. Founded on the banks of the Tombigbee River, Plymouth once played a crucial role as a trading post and military defense site during the Creek War. But a combination of malaria outbreaks from the river swamps and shifting overland trade routes caused the entire population to leave before the Civil War, leaving Plymouth to rot in silence. Leaving Plymouth's silent forest site, we enter the inhabited town of Port Gibson, a place surrounded by old Gothic architecture and haunted ruins. During the Civil War, the town was somehow spared by General Ulysses S. Grant, who considered it too beautiful to destroy. Yet the surviving antebellum beauty of Port Gibson gives off a deep sense of gloom, with old two-story buildings lining streets shaded by massive trees draped in thick Spanish moss. The creepiest part of Port Gibson lies on its outskirts, where the legendary Windsor ruins stand. This structure is all that remains of one of Mississippi's grandest plantation homes, mysteriously destroyed by fire in 1890, leaving 23 giant Corinthian columns rising stiffly into the sky in a remote forest. From the towering stone columns of Port Gibson, our journey cuts toward Yazoo County to visit Satartia, a tiny town marked by modern apocalyptic trauma. On February 22, 2020, this remote swamp-edge town became an instant death zone when a nearby 24-inch liquid carbon dioxide pipeline ruptured after a landslide. The massive break released more than 31,000 barrels of liquid CO2, creating a thick, greenish gas cloud that crawled downhill and swallowed Satartia within minutes. Because carbon dioxide is heavier than air, the toxic gas quickly settled in the valley and wiped out the oxygen supply, leaving dozens of residents struggling to breathe, passing out inside their homes, and stalling vehicles starved of air. Today, the landscape feels silent and post-disaster. Rows of old wooden houses standing still along the foggy Yazoo River seem to lock in the terrifying memory of a small town suddenly frozen by silent mass panic. Only a few miles from Satartia, we enter the administrative center of Yazoo County, home to one of America's most famous supernatural legends, Yazoo City. The city has a history filled with repeated disasters, from yellow fever epidemics to major floods. But its darkest attraction centers on the legend of the Witch of Yazoo, a local folktale about an old woman said to have practiced black magic near the swamp. According to legend, before the woman drowned in the swamp while being chased by townspeople in 1904, she vowed to return within 20 years and burn the entire city. Mysteriously, on May 25, 1904, exactly as foretold, a massive fire swept through and destroyed Yazoo City's business district beyond control. Here, visitors find an eerie experience at Glenwood Cemetery. Yes, the witch's grave is isolated by thick iron chains, which local myth says are often found mysteriously broken. Meanwhile, the small town of Shukqualac is dying economically. Once a busy railroad station for shipping agricultural goods, Shukqualac now suffers from severe long-term economic depression after losing its local industrial base. Massive population decline has left the town with a fragile social structure and rows of infrastructure slowly falling apart. The downtown commercial district presents a deeply troubling and eerie sight. Rows of old brick buildings from the 1920s stand silent, with rusted, decaying roofs, wooden doors chained from the outside, and cracked walls covered in creeping vines. The silence along its main streets feels thick, creating the strong impression of a town that was suddenly evacuated after a disaster, leaving behind stiff, dead space under the deep south sun. Moving toward Madison County, we find Flora, a town with an ancient mystical charm and heavy rural silence. The town is surrounded by traditional farmland, but the main feature giving this area its eerie atmosphere is the Mississippi Petrified Forest. Yes, this is the only petrified forest site in the eastern United States, where giant prehistoric trees turn to stone over millions of years through a massive geological process. Walking beneath the canopy of Flora's ancient forest feels cold and strange. Huge stone tree trunks lying across the ground look like living creatures frozen in eternal death. Combined with the remains of an old, early 20th century railroad depot now standing empty and neglected on the edge of town, Flora presents a perfect mix of dead ancient nature and the remains of human civilization fading into silence. From Flora's stone forest, we move south towards Simpson County to witness the fading remains of a timber metropolis in the town of Delo. In the 1920s, Delo was home to the largest sawmill in the entire southern United States, operated by the Finkbine Lumber Company. At its peak, the town was crowded and ran 24 hours a day, with the roar of giant saws and constant factory smoke filling the sky. When all the pine forests around Simpson County were cut down completely, Delo's economic glory collapsed in an instant. The population shrank sharply, leaving behind a very quiet small town with a heavy atmosphere. A camera moving down Delo's main street would capture rows of old stone storefronts standing empty, their window glass shattered. Delo's silence finds its melancholy twin in Clark County, where the small town of Enterprise faces extreme infrastructure aging. Standing on the banks of the Chickasaw River, Enterprise held a crucial role in the mid-19th century as a regional railroad junction and commercial river port, even briefly serving as a refuge for Confederate government facilities during fierce fighting nearby. The death of its river port function, caused by modern land transportation, slowly drained Enterprise of its economic life. Walking through the town today reveals a strong rural Gothic scene. Many large Victorian homes sit abandoned and neglected, with badly peeling paint, porch columns leaning and rotting from heavy moisture, and wide yards overgrown with chest-high brush. From the decaying old homes of Enterprise, the journey moves to Jefferson Davis County to see the impact of modern economic depression in Prentiss. This small town, once dependent on retail and local agricultural services, has watched its social and commercial assets die one by one as its population grows older. Prentiss presents the image of a small town under social and physical strain. Along its main road and outer areas, the dominant sites are rusting former gas stations swallowed by weeds, local grocery buildings nailed shut with wooden boards, and abandoned working-class housing complexes. The atmosphere is deeply gloomy as the town shows clear signs of a community running out of energy to survive. This discussion closes in Pelahatchie, a small town with an eerie aura shaped by abandoned old industrial buildings and the silence of a railroad corridor. The name Pelahatchie comes from the Choctaw language and means storm river, reflecting the strong emotional link between the local landscape and the long history of settlement. The town once enjoyed economic stability as a center of sawmilling and farming, before shifting corporate roots left it in structural decline. The most dramatic scene in Pelahatchie centers around the railroad tracks cutting through town. Here stand old warehouse complexes from the early 20th century, their structures weakened and their tin roofs blackened with rust, surrounded by rows of old freight cars left frozen on dead rails. When dusk comes and fog begins to cover the empty tracks, Pelahatchie gives off a deeply haunting atmosphere, closing this journey with a real portrait of how a human settlement in Mississippi slowly loses its strength.